Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures Podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Hello, everyone. Wait, anything?
Hello, and a happy Tuesday to you, gentlemen.
There we go.
No, I was just waiting because last time, you have such a great intro. It's like I feel like when you
Sometimes
say
there's more.
"Hi, Seth," I should be like doing something.
Yeah.
And then Tommy and I were talking over each other to, extend our morning greetings last time. So I was
Got it.
just giving some space for Tommy.
Well, I know what to do on
And
Tuesdays
we botched
now.
it, like we do. So,
Yeah. Listen, I think 237 episodes in now. I know on Tuesdays, I know who goes second. We got the Happy Tuesday. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
you
We're
heard it
doing
here,
some brand
folks.
image
I
here,
get
right?
the clear path.
You got the clear
into
go ahead.
Second
So-
ownership of
Second
vocal
ownership.
spewing on Tuesdays. Got it.
So that means Tommy's got to figure out something
Thank
for
you.
Thursdays then.
Okay.
We can't force it, man.
I know it's just got to happen
Yeah.
naturally.
Evolve.
You've only
Something to
had
look forward to.
237 tries to get it right, Tommy.
You've been trying to think of names for us for like about 50 episodes. You're like Data Mike and
Still not working.
Still not going anywhere.
Still not going anywhere.
Mm.
Let's jump in right into our main topic for today. This might be a little bit of a shorter episode for those of you who are watching live. This is a pre-recorded episode, so we're kind of going through. People are traveling, so we're therefore having to record a couple episodes a bit early. So today, our article will be in the description, but it's talking about effective data storytelling, and this article comes from Brent. I think it's Brent Dykes in his book in Effective Data Storytelling. It's kind of the book that's off of Amazon as well, so you can go pick up the book if you want to learn more about effective data storytelling. So just kicking things off, I think the gist of this article is really talking about how do you remove the right amount of clutter from a chart, but yet keep enough that it's informative, right? He has this term that he kind of introduces very early in the article around Chartjunk. Things that are on the chart that are not really adding or enhancing the chart, but yet they're part of that chart.
Let's read between the lines here, and this is where details are important.
Okay.
So the summarization, I think he does a great job. He's bringing to light the two kind of approaches that some of the heaviest hitters in visualization, like Tuft and Few, right?
Stephen Few.
Tuft was the Chartjunk guy, right? Eliminate it all because all it's going to do is distract an end user. And Few was like, it depends, but there's a little you can add here and there. Overall, and we'll dive into it. I love Brent's approach. I think this is bar none one of the best, most concise articles I've read in a long time that take a lot of the visualization conversation that we pontificated about, and we will again today, and in just a summary. And if you were going to use something to change fundamentally how you build visualizations in Power BI, use this article. Read through it, understand it really well. He lays out some charts which we'll go through, but I love it. I don't think I disagree with anything in here.
What?
Which is maybe a first, but we'll see. We still have some time.
I'm sure there's something we can find you to disagree with here, Seth.
So, I mean, here's the thing. There's actually something here I feel like I've been saying for a while and something that I've brought to attention to other people that are training, like the idea of a perfect report. And one thing that call it a hot take, but that reports are subjective in their quality. There's kind of an element here to that because you can either one of the things that he talks about is there is no such thing as a perfect report. And I love that idea because, Mike, I still use in training today the idea of the data to ink ratio when I'm telling people about
I do as well. Yep.
And that directly from the podcast. And for those who have not seen that episode, data to ink ratio is it's an older theory, but it's basically that talking about only have as much ink that's not data as you need. So text, labels, descriptions.
Correct. And just to be clear, this is a Tuft. So in this article, it talks about Tuft as one of the kind of founders of data visualizations, talking about that. And Tuft, that's his argument, right? Every bit of ink you spend should be used towards educating the user on your data element, your data point. If it's not, or and you could literally go through, and I think this is a great test. If there's ink, quote unquote ink, as if you're printing it, right? If there's ink being used to put something on the page, is it absolutely required? And you can literally go through for every single object on the page and say, does this add additional story or value to that chart? If it doesn't, take it away.
Is it supporting the visual and it's what it's trying to communicate?
And this is, I think, where Brent is jumping in here and saying, okay, we hear you, Tufty. Like that makes sense. But then when you look at Stephen Few, Stephen maybe provides a little bit more of a balanced perspective and not so hard or rigorous against removing all objects from the report, maybe focusing on the key or most important objects to help you build things inside your charting.
Well, the 3 points that he makes that come out of, Stephen Few are like, are you including extra stuff to engage the interest of the audience?
Yep.
Draw attention to certain things, and or make the message more memorable. And if you think about it, that is a nuance between Tuft, because if I was going to follow Tuft and just only the ink on the page, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm removing access. I'm like, it's only the bar chart and that's it. Well, a lot of times we've talked about the complexity of some of the data behind something. Like, so are you going to add a visual indicator or an icon or something else that is going to enhance an external person's understanding of the data that they're looking at in the visual, right? And I think that's where there's this middle ground that Stephen Few in his approach makes a lot of sense. And overall, right, like we're still talking about this spectrum of data journalism where you might throw in a lot more art or a lot more effects outside of a visualization.
That's true.
Versus just a straight report where you're producing just visuals for data consumption. And I think within here is he's looking for a happy medium, but ultimately I think errs more on the maybe it's not it's a good middle ground.
I think so. I agree. I think, again, it's a balance, right? To your point, Tommy, earlier, I don't think there's a perfect report. There's not a perfect chart. People are going to have opinions of what they would want to see or not want to see. So you're always trying to, if you try to appease everyone, you appease no one, I guess is the phrase, right? So if you try and make everyone happy, at the end of the day, you're not really making anyone happy because we're not really focused. So sometimes you do have to make some compromises some places, and everyone has to kind of figure out, okay, we have to meet in the middle about, okay, what kind of is the value of the report?
And there's some, go ahead.
No, I guess the question I have is, we didn't all just land here, right?
Correct.
We didn't all just like start building reports and we're like, oh yeah, we're like we read these books long ago when we were data people. Like in your how have your backgrounds in, like, where did you guys start? If you recall, like in how you developed a report page in terms of like look and feel, and where do you fall as far as like which one of these theories you typically follow as far as an influencer and how you build your reports?
That's a great question.
That was a good question.
I learned everything I know from Seth. I was trying to get him to take a spit take there on his.
Well done. I'm used to holding your hand.
So for those of you who are listening to the podcast, Seth was about to take a drink of his cup, and I said it right as he was taking a drink. So again, what I'll kind of lean on is I did some formal training around using Delta Associates. I was in category management at the time. I was looking at lots of data and trying to really pull out what are the key insights that help you understand what is driving revenue up or down for a particular category. And category management teams have a pretty daunting challenge in front of them. There's a lot of data they have to deal with. There's potentially a lot of products. You could be up to the hundreds of products. And so which product out of the hundreds of things that you do is producing the most revenue, which one is losing the most? And then we talked a lot about like market share and market share analysis. So from there, there was just a very good portion of the class talking about basic visualization development. And the gentleman who taught the class was a PhD, very sharp individual, studied this stuff for a long time. So I learned a lot from him to really start my fundamental background. And then I've read excerpts from Stephen Few. I've read excerpts from Tuft and kind of incorporated, okay, what of the things I've heard from these other authors, which ones do I resonate with? And I think I'm probably, if I had to put myself in a bucket, I'm probably more of a Tuft type designer. I like a lot less stuff. I'm a very distracted person. I get very excited about things. So having a lot of extra things on the page is distracting to me. So I really like a clean, not a lot of labels, very clean designation of reports, and just kind of really picking on, okay, now that you understand kind of like visualization things, to me, I had to start figuring out, okay, how do I implement what these members of the community are saying about visualization, but how do I overlay them into, okay, what can Power BI do, right? Should I turn on this thing? I can't necessarily do minor and major axes labels on an x-axis or y-axis on a chart, right? We are physically limited right now by the capabilities of that chart. And so this is one of the reasons why I really like Deneb as a custom visual, because I have the ability, I have the capability to be able to create really custom things and really dial in stuff the way I want. So that's kind of where I think I came from. Tommy, where did you come from? Where was your background and what was your studying?
Hold on. Before we go to Tommy.
All right.
You always start at Delta Associates. Are you saying that you never created a report prior to that?
Well,
I was building Excel stuff. I mean, this is really old. I mean, this is when I started learning Power. Like I learned Power Query at around this time.
Okay.
And I was building charts. So at the time, I was building charts in Excel with data engineering all in Excel. So I wasn't at this time. This was before I even touched Power BI at this point.
You're one of the lucky ones.
Really old.
So I come from a very, very different background. I wouldn't be lying if my ADHD tendencies come to play a little with visualizations, but it's really more, I started from a digital marketing background where there are so many elements in digital advertising that you can directly influence. Keywords, ads, where you place it, time of day, and all those things matter how much you actually spend, which was a huge part of what we did. So I was tasked with not just building the visualizations for looking at where the ad spend's coming from, what ad, but also all the other things going into a digital marketing campaign, the organic stuff, the traffic to the site, the actual purchases. So, and all those things from a marketing point of view, you can influence. I can directly kind of tweak. So there's a lot that you wanted to see. And that was a lot of things that you needed to know to go, okay, this ad's not working, this headline's not working, so yada, yada, yada. And that was really my influence to kind of look at all the variables, so to speak, in one place to say, if I do this and if I mix it with this, what could happen? That changed very drastically as I transitioned to a more global reporter, and I was working with sales. First report for them, like, no. Can you just show me if I'm going to make my target for this quarter? That's it. And it was a hard transition initially, because I'm like, but there's so many other things. Don't you want to know what states that it's working out, or what companies potentially? Like, no, I need to see this. And that was probably the first few years into it, as I started transitioning and really realized I had to make a transition on my concept of building reports, because it goes back to you put all 80% of your times in modeling visual and the calculations, and you want to, in a sense, show for it. It's like there's so much in here. But I think part of our discussions, but really going into objectives and key results and really trying to focus on that as the forefront first has been the biggest influence, transitioning to kind of how I see what clutter is now and how I see kind of what clarity is.
So one of the things I think Seth was asking also, though, was who was your inspiration and who do maybe you align with? Was there a book that you, I mean, tell me, I know you read a lot of books and you've got a lot of things that you're always kind of consuming. Any particular books that you read or consumed that you felt, I'm going to take away some key points from this book? What books have you read?
The Storytelling with Data, the Stephen Few book, was incredible. That was probably one of the catalysts when I first read that.
Okay.
And I mean, if you looked at the highlights that I have in there, and I literally have notes on there, because I would just refer back to it, because again, it just takes those elements of, let's start with a random project. How do you go about it? Forget the visual side. It was in a sense, the initial conception of what you were trying to build, or what the point of it is.
this is a lot of the insight development, right?
Mm-hmm.
What am I trying to do at the end of this
Group
report?
by what, show by this kind of thing.
Yep.
And it really helped. That helped, in a sense, categorize or put things into the right boxes for me.
Seth, how about you? What kind of artists, what kind of books or authors kind of drove some of your inspiration?
Yeah.
You learned everything from Mike, right?
I learned everything from Mike Carlo and Delta Associates.
Oh, God.
No, before all this, like the reports were SSRS, and I rarely built any charts. I think when Power BI first came out in SharePoint, right, as like this interface where you could just do everything, it was a little daunting, and you just start throwing things on the page, and it was probably to Tommy's point, way over cluttered. Like just put as much information on there as possible. But because I didn't have an idea of how I would want, this is where I started reading, and that's where I think also the interest that you and I had in this blank canvas, right, where we could just do anything we wanted, was really important to engage data people in this journey of understanding, like, what is the best way to present information. I've read them all, right? So not all, but Information Dashboard Design by Stephen Few, Alberto Cairo, Scott Baronato, Good Charts. It was one of my favorites.
Another good one.
Cole Knaflack, who wrote the Storytelling with Data.
Yes.
And I think she's got a second book out too. I don't know if I fall into all, like, any of these. I'm sure all of them influenced. With an art background, I like a little bit more, but I would say I probably agree with you. I start at Toft. I start at stripping down everything I possibly can to the point where I'm confident that I've provided the information that's important and relevant related to axis, title, like, do I need a legend where, how many, etc. Like, strip it all the way down, and then I start to apply some of the principles I've learned, right? Color, alignment, sizing. Do I want to embellish a little bit with an element in the background? I think even within here, Brent makes a good point of background versus foreground, right? Like popping visuals, because one of the things that's a real challenge if you're not used to it is if you throw 5 visuals on a page and they're all the same color, it's all white, right? Everything's this one blob. Whereas if there is a little bit of a frame, whether that's done by the background or an effect on the visual itself, it pops that image and focuses your attention, right? So we've all underline all of these things that we change in as it relates to properties are a lot of the visualization interactions, right? That we as humans, like, what is the word I'm looking for? There's a lot of theories and study that has been done about psychologically how people ingest visuals data. And this is where all of this comes from. So I like the fact that in here, Brent is just like, hey, here's things we want to do to make your visualizations better. But underlying that all are the vast amounts of study and, testing that people have done to ensure that this is why we do things, because as end users who have no concept whatsoever of, oh my gosh, like that number, I know what you're looking at right away.
Yes.
Don't realize that there were 5 very conscious choices of, like, highlighting a certain area or doing certain things to make sure that data popped out for you.
Yes.
To reduce your cognitive load, which is what this is all about. Yeah. It's all about, like, how fast can you get people to ingest information, and marrying all these ideas in these books and everything together is, I think, the approach I'm at now. So I start with very minimalistic, very Toft-esque, right? Typically, and then I'll apply from there to a point where I'm not trying not to overcrowd with look and feel.
Two things you did hit very close to home. I remember reading too about the white background on white and kind of like the things popping out. And I remember the first time I read that, I'm like, I don't get it, because it was I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to understand this. It was a different concept, and I may not be the most artistic person, but when we started reading, one other shout out I want to do is Enrico Bertini about the cognitive load and that ability to kind of process. And that, I think, kind of finally married the two together, like getting that idea together. Mike, one thing that you said on the podcast a while ago too, I think plays into this nicely, is you build a visual for a client and it was pretty direct on like the cumulative sales. Made a lot of sense, but for them, they didn't get it.
And there's also things too, like I think as report designers, I want to just jump on your point right there.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're a bit more comfortable with what kind of visuals and more advanced calculations to get to an answer. I think if the more time you spend looking at visuals, the more time you spend information transferring. So, I mean, there's also the IBCS standard, which also has something else I really like. It does a very good job of communicating common patterns in data and helps you identify, the highs versus the lows. What's the difference there? And one of the concepts that I talked a lot about that I was taught was position and direction, right? Position is where I'm at right now. Direction is where we're going. Are we increasing or are we decreasing? Those are kind of two things that are kind of beat into your head when you kind of start thinking about these different charts and visuals. So to your point though, Tommy, we may be comfortable with looking at that cumulative total of information and really identifying, these 3 customers or these products are really making up 90% or 80% of our total sales. We should focus our attention here, right? It's a matter of sometimes we lose the details by falling into the weeds too fast. And so I think a lot of the times is we focus so much on the details. We focus so much on these little things. We lost 700% of our sales. Yeah, on a part or a product that was like less than 1% of our total sales volume. So should we focus our attention or a lot of time or effort to make sure that sales go up on that one tiny little part? No, we shouldn't. We should focus on the 1% sales loss we had on our largest product and our largest offering. That's driving the most revenue. And I think a lot of people,
appropriate stuff.
It's really making sure, like, the way you present data, the way you look at information, we really are talking to other people via a chart. And so all we're doing is we're learning how to communicate these techniques. And particularly, I really love this idea of like the frame, talking about the graphical objects. How do you convey the axes or the labels, right? All these things are attributing to our graphical communication around data and labeling. And so when you communicate, I'm literally, this is probably someone else already figured this out. I'm just now having the light bulb moment after what Tommy said. But if I'm communicating with people, both people need to understand the same language.
Both people.
So if I'm talking to Tommy in Italian, Tommy's going to have a blast. He's going to laugh at me because I don't know what I'm doing, because my Italian's horrible and I don't know any words. So, I mean, I'll just be saying, linguine or spaghetti and like things that I know how to like say. And half of those things I'll probably even be messing up. So, but when people talk in the same language, a language that I know, English, like we can communicate, we can convey ideas. And when you learn about that, like to your point, Seth, earlier, the psychology of like communication, we're literally trying to make each other have the same wavelength. Like we're trying to get our brains to think the same way. And it's the same concept, except now we're focusing on visualizations. Can I get the visual to invoke the same analysis and or emotion? And I think that to this point, and especially what Brent is saying here is, Brent is saying sometimes in order to get those key points to focus on the same key information that you're trying to storytell, you might need an arrow. You might need a chat bubble. You might need a little bit of extra information on the page that helps the story or the communication of what I think is important be the same that the other person can read on their side as well.
Love all those points. And I think I'm going to dovetail and tip a little bit onto here as well. Even though it's more visual, is like choosing a visual case, I think it also applies to this as well, right? Like a while ago, we talked about there's this propensity as data folks to look for the next new visual right? Oh, I want to build something really cool. And like all of a sudden you're introducing a very complex visual and end users don't know how to consume it. So you're confusing or you're
Mm-hmm.
overburdening them because they don't get what it is you're presenting to them.
Yep.
Um, I think in so there's this, yeah, I think there's a principle in here too, where it's like if they're not used to something,
Yes.
it's very hard for people to like understand what you're presenting to them. And to me, I think you also have to be cognizant of this as you're developing whatever, background wire for like the experience of digesting information,
Mm-hmm.
by using a lot of these visualization techniques to make sure you're highlighting things. You also want to make sure that you're not throwing like the super cool latest thing and like all of a sudden your background has
Mhm.
all these stripes and it's super distracting or whatever the case may be. It's just a dumb example, but I found it interesting that I think also ties into here. One question I have is what do you think is the biggest chart junk mistake that people have? Like we're talking about, like we'll get into like how do you clean stuff up, but
Mm-hmm.
like what is the biggest chart junk thing you guys have fallen into or that like you see people make a lot of?
What man, that brings up directly some past experiences. When first started, a big thing was I would put a lot of the labels and a lot of the additional metrics in there. So like a lot of supporting metrics into the visual side of it, whether it's tooltips or as smaller visuals. And people go, well, we don't need that, or like that's too much. And I remember getting angry at first, being like, I'm giving you the keys to the kingdom here. You can literally, I wish I had your job because now I could, I can see all those different elements and tweak everything. And at least for me, that was one of the big transitions. What I still see in a lot of reports out there, working with clients, and it's a lot of the labels and still a lot of the whole story, what I'm trying to tell, even if it is standard visuals. It's a
So
bar chart. It's,
in
yeah,
general, just
in general.
too much on the page, like
It,
too many visuals on the
it's
page.
not so much too many visuals, it's things that are all the same color. So like it's not so much what pops out. So if I
Mm-hmm.
was trying to get that high overview glance, it just
Oh,
looks
trying
like,
to solve all your problems with text.
no, it's like 4 visuals that you can't tell what each one's doing because
Okay.
they're all the same colors.
Mm. So
What
I'm
about
going to go one of the visual junks that I think I find, and this is probably one where I'm now probably more adapting my theme files to absorb some of this correction. Every time you build a visual, and this is a default thing that comes out of desktop, and I think this is just the defaults that Microsoft puts forward towards you are kind of how the report will somewhat style initially. So
Mhm.
I'm going to emphasize here to some degree, right? One, read up and study up on what you guys, what you think as a community, what you think is good visual design for your company, for you. Then two, think about what those patterns look like and go build common theme files, because those really do set a lot of the tone around what is in the reports. Let me give you an example. Whenever you create a bar chart, the bar chart always comes with a legend. If you draw a bar chart by itself, it should come with a legend. That does make sense. And also, if you draw a single bar chart, there's a x-axis title and a y-axis title. Initially, that was not there, but now it's on there by default. So you now have potentially a title on the chart, which always is there. You now have the title on the x and y axis. And there are certain things that I think are self-evident, right? When I was in engineering school, I was always taught label everything. Have everyone label like clearly what you're looking at. Label all the axes, right? So everyone needs to know what you're looking at. But that does make sense when you're talking about a single data chart. But over time, I'm hoping that the people are saying, oh, May 23, May 24. Like, okay, obviously that's a
Mhm.
date. There is some implied things I could then remove. So instead of having, date or calendar date listed as my axis on the title, that's just one more thing the user has to read. I'd rather have them think about what do these data points mean on the x-axis and then internalize that, forcing them to not just read it, but actually saying, oh, these are dates on the bottom of the calendar. So you asked, what are the junk things that are created? I think one, it is legends, because if you have the same chart with different categories across different things, you'll have the colored bars make a color, plus the legend makes some colors, plus if you have another visual on the page that may also be representing those colors. So I like to think about, making a single bar chart. They call it like a rainbow chart, where each bar is represented by a single color. So we have the name of the bar, you have the bar on the page, and then the color of the bar links to the X or Y axis on the bar chart. And then anywhere else you use that color, you don't need a legend anymore, where you've already defined it on the page. Essentially, you've built a bar chart that is a legend for the rest of the page. And then when you click on things or objects, you don't have to reuse those things. So I think legends are a noise that is added, a clutter. And I would also say potentially too many X and Y axes are also clutter that is also not needed on the report page.
Yeah, you're forgetting a big part of that too was from the data to ink ratio. It's like if you already have a title that says sales by
Correct.
a category,
Yes,
you don't need to show the category.
exactly right. And I also of the opinion is I don't want the clutter, but I do want people to understand what is this chart for? Like, how do I interpret this chart?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times I like to use those little icons that Microsoft provides. Again, they're not incredibly discoverable. I wish they were a bit more apparent to users, but I do like using the information button on the visual and typing up, and there's a little text box you can type up, use this visual to do these things. Here's how you read the data. If you can give a little bit of text around what that is. Now, I would agree. If I'm building reports for myself, I don't do that, right? If I'm building reports for an audience or for a team of people, I think more about how will other people use and consume this report. And I'm more, for me, I'm building complex visuals, weird stuff, right? Stuff that makes sense to me. However, if I'm building for an audience, I really do have to assess the audience of those reports and say, what are the skills of that team? What can they handle? And have them talk to me about what is important to them. How do they want to see representations of data? And I do like it, right? A lot of times we'll be given an Excel sheet. Here you go. This is what my report should look like. These are the things that I care about. Great. At least it gives me a better language. You're communicating to me about the language you understand how to speak. I can then pair it back to you, a report that has a similar language.
I will say, Mike, this is one of those where I think you held my hand. Maybe this was a Delta Associates thing.
I think this is a Delta thing for me, for sure.
Mine was Legends as well. Like, and I know you brought this to me because at first, it's probably one of the hardest things to see because you're just like, oh yeah, I have this line chart. There's multiple different lines. You have to see them, and then to think about it in terms of, well, yeah, but if you're looking at this category across 4 different visuals on the page, you only need to see those category colors defined as something one time.
Agreed.
On the page.
Correct.
Are there always going to be exceptions? Yes. Like
100%.
One that blew, like just recently I encountered was the individual going, yeah, but I want to blow up just that image. Well, and this is the big pet peeve. I just want to blow up that image and snapshot it. Like if the legend's not there, I can't. I'm like, okay, fine.
Yes.
But one of the things I do want to point out in this that is something I didn't correlate, which I probably should have because I had an art background. So in art, like you're working very closely on areas, especially on large things. So if you're painting or drawing, whatever. And what you have to do sometimes to get your perspective is take a step back, walk away from your piece, look at it from a distance to understand like, okay, like is what I'm doing making sense, etc. One of the best things I've done is apply that. I don't know if this was also a Delta thing, Mike, but apply that where if you actually step back from your computer and like at a distance and look at a report page, a lot of these Chartjunk kind of things or challenge areas visually start to pop out to you. Like, wow, there's a lot of color over here, or there's a lot of text that's just like
that dark section on the report page.
Yeah. Go in, take a look. Do you need it all? And this was one of those where Legends is just like, oh my goodness, like they're everywhere. Loud. There's so much going on.
Yep.
And it compresses the actual space that I'm providing informational data that people would want to look at.
Yeah.
So that was just a method that I wanted to share outside of that. We've talked a lot, I think, about our backgrounds and the challenges within here. Do we get stuck a little bit into some of the suggestions that Brent has here as far as like
I do
main categories?
And just before we move on, I think we definitely move on to that one. And Seth, I just wanted to tag one more thought on the end of your note here. Legends, I think, are indicative also of color. overuse of color.
Yeah.
I think you're right there. So a lot of new users that I see in Power BI, they will bring a lot of charts together. And if I think about a page of a report, there's usually this concept of there's not, I'll call it congruency between visuals and the colors of those different visuals, right? So, and what I mean by that is, if I have a certain category of product name, right? And if this page is going to focus a little bit on product name, and we are going to say, okay, each product name is going to be part of the theme colors that go along with this report. Well, okay, now what I've done is I've locked in every single object on that page to be that product, whatever that product is now should have the same color across all the entire page. What I'll see people doing a lot is they'll transition to a different category, like maybe sales region or something else. So there's another definition. And so what you're finding is we're now trying to anchor the color blue to the iPhone product, and we're anchoring the color blue to North America, right? So now the color. So now when I look, I'm actually adding ambiguity to the report page where I'm mixing and matching particular data colors to relating to different things. And so again, in the context of one visual, makes total sense. Colors, visuals, no problem. But when you start looking at multiple visuals on the same page, and I think I find this particularly confusing to people on the overview page of reports, right? When you build a report, you typically have an overview page that summarizes a lot of KPIs, and you build specific pages for products, regions of sales, whatever, right? You start focusing in on a particular topic. It's easier to give colors on that page, but I think the miss for me is having people change the definition of a color mid-page, and that confuses people. So I'd also echo there, if a lot of times I'll pick on people and be like, hey, you've made categories colors, great. Everything in this page should be based on the colors of those categories. That's what it should be doing. Anything else you do, it should be like shades of gray, shades of black, shades of a single color, right? So start focusing on a different shade of color there and having that one as well.
Yeah, groups help with that too, though. Or bucketing.
Yeah, totally.
Combine a whole bunch of products together.
I love that one too.
Category or something like that, because it's a challenge when you have 100 different products and you want 100 different colors, and then you're going to reuse something else. But color confusion across the report page is also a good.
The most impactful thing I've done to really influence that is if you have a bar chart with categories and it's like they're all the same color, great, especially if they're all just a dark blue or whatever it is. But having shading or conditional formatting just to show a range,
a gradient of color,
is absolutely huge. Where then you don't have to add in that other element piece in there. And it's honestly now on my summary pages, it's very hard for me not to have that feature, because that's such a big catalyst if you're showing a rate or if you're showing some KPI, to give a little more context to it.
Excellent. Sorry, Seth, I want to go back to your point there, your question. Like, let's go back to the article now and start talking through some of the points here inside the article. Was there any particular area you wanted to point? So it kind of...
No, I think just leaning into the 5 main categories, like where Brent, I think, takes all of the conversation we've been having, right? Which is really just the initial, the authors, where we've been digesting visualization, like all the different things. And he does a fantastic job. And he even says, as I was researching what contributes to clutter in data charts, I couldn't find any comprehensive resources on the topic, which is true. Like, there's some fantastic books, but like to consolidate it all into a recommendation engine thing where people who may not want to read the 5 books, or don't like want to dive that deeply. He built this to assist other people in identifying what issues can lead to clutter in data visualizations. He's assembled a collection of potential clutter elements and organized them into 5 main categories.
I like these. The categories make a lot of sense. Let's go through a chart is decompressed into multiple categories. The frame, literally the line that encapsulates the chart or the background image of that.
Yeah.
There's the graphical objects, like the bars themselves on the page. There's the axes, just literally drawing the lines, the X and the Y axis, and then potentially any of the I guess it would be, what do you call the lines that are across the page? The grid lines, I guess it would be the grid lines as well. And then labeling the legend, labeling the X or Y axis, the title of the chart. Those are all label elements. And then he's calling this last area overlay objects, things that appear as like an arrow pointing at some data or a chat bubble or a tooltip, right? A tooltip would fall into that overlay object area. So how do you want to tackle this part of the conversation, Seth? You want to kind of go through one by one or just kind of pick out a couple of the key highlights here?
I think we're far enough along. Maybe we pick a few that stand out to us, or what do you guys? It's not my show. It's collectively. We can decide what we want to do.
Seth, what do you want to do on this show today?
Yeah. What I was thinking, guys, is we should not talk about what you want to talk about. We should do what I want.
Let me show you a collection of wines that I have. No, but probably what do you think is the most impactful?
I think. Well, at the same, I think each one can be.
Yeah.
Right? So I think he calls it out. Like if we just talk about framing, right? How do you what is the key thing you want to keep in mind? He calls out chart background, chart margins, chart borders.
Yep.
Dangers around this. Your chart borders, they don't need to be super thick lines. They don't need to be black, right? They don't need to pop that hard, especially if your background color is really subtle.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
So just because you're going to frame something doesn't mean like you can actually make it much more distracting if that border
it's so hard
is too heavy, right? Chart backgrounds, pick colors unless you're at this for a really long time and you have some ideas of like, okay, I have a symbol or something off to the side that's going to be part of the background, right? But it's not in any way, shape, or form going to it's the difference between background and foreground. You want the visuals to be the thing people look at. And as an ancillary thing, if they're like, oh, that looks pretty, right? But it in no way, shape, or form should you like, what have we seen in the past? Like you stick an amusement park scene with like thousands of people as a photo behind an image, like behind the visuals. And then it's almost like you're overloaded with all of the visual aspects of the background that you're like, you're having to like try to focus in on a visual. Right. I think those are the two biggest mistakes that are easy to make when you're like, oh, background, foreground, I can totally do this. Stick subtle, right, at first and don't look to like really, nail things forward. It's just all you need is a subtle eye movement thing to lock into a particular visual. Those would be my like highlights.
Yeah, I like that one too. And I'd say another one around frame, another observation I think particularly with Power BI is when you're talking about 2 or 3 charts together, multiple charts, right? So if the 2 charts make sense if the data is related across the 2 charts, make a border around the 2 charts together as a whole item.
Yeah,
bundle them together.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that makes sense there from that perspective. I really like that one. And then one of the things that I've been working on some things with Megan Longoria, she's very pro like making sure that's accessible and things like that as well. So I'm paying more attention to like the contrast ratio of colors. And to your point here, Seth, the trim or the border around the visuals should be more, how do you say this? The trim and the visuals can be less accessible. They don't have to be as hard edge. The colors don't have to be as drastic of a change as you do like the bars against the background of the bars information, right? So the bars themselves on the page needs to have a higher contrast ratio between the background and the bar color versus the border or the frame that can be much more subtle. So as there are different objects that I think that are in the report that become more accessible or need to be thought of as more accessible than other objects on the page. And right now, Microsoft is trying to do a good job on this, but there is no accessibility checker. There is no eyedropper. There is nothing inside the Power BI report page that would say, this part of the page, these pixels are not different enough in contrast. Now, there is some things like high contrast mode. I think another design technique for high accessibility is not using color at all and going like hatching of visuals and doing like black and white on everything. So everything just becomes a black and white type report page. So it becomes much more stark, but then you have that high contrast wherever you're building things. So you can simplify and increase the contrast. I don't know how, I'm still maybe trying to formulate the best things I would think here. Again, it's the tooling the way it is today is not very easy for me just to quickly identify when I build something that it is not accessible. Right. You have to like build it and then test it after the fact, which I think is not. I would be more apt to build accessible based reporting if it was built into the tool. If it was easier for me to get to.
I wonder if that's one of the challenges, and maybe you just found the one thing I'm like, maybe there is something lacking in the article. Like, but it's not just the article, right? Like I don't recall like huge sections about visualization with accessibility changes.
Hmm?
And maybe I wonder while I'm saying that, it's like not meant to be critical of these people who are spending a ton of time teaching us about visualization in Just, but is it that, especially with color, these accessible adjustments we need to make actually break what
Mhm.
the larger audience like the not the principles, right?
Yes.
Do they completely shred, like, yeah, it's not going to look good for everybody else because it has to be in these color tones, or they're
Correct.
not going to understand or visually see these elements, and in order for that report to look the same or be digested in a similar way, those things don't conform to the normal way in which we would build out, and we can't, like, it's hard to switch that. I don't know. I don't know all the intricacies, but I would imagine it's got to be, especially around color, something to the effect of it doesn't follow the same principles that all these, the historical body of work has been done against.
I think what you point there, I think this makes sense in the next section. He talks about with graphical items, right? In graphical items, he talks about like shading on the bar, and is there no formatting on the bar, or is there a rounded top on the edge, or does the bar get a shade or a drop shadow behind it? I think a lot of these things are traps we fall into. The number of times I've seen people making fun of the Excel 3D graph things, where you're like, yeah, I see that there's data in there, and I can see there's some relative information height differences between stuff. But now that it's a 3D graph, I really don't know where the bar ends. It could end in two different places. So like, I think there's definitely some clutter and another one that comes to mind right now is this whole trend around the frosted glass look of a report, right? There's this very like cool, toned background image, and then we put like a white scrim or a screen on it, and in that white screen it's like somewhat transparent so things can kind of bleed through. One, I think it looks freaking amazing. It's like designed very well, but every time I look at these reports, I'm like, that looks cool, and then I'm like, okay, now I gotta step back and say, what are they actually trying to say with the data? And so I'm so distracted by the background and the frostiness and the bleed through. Like I lose.
That's the thing right now.
Correct.
But it absolutely would not be bold enough for somebody who had visual.
Correct.
Right.
Yes.
Like it
exactly.
probably
There's
just
not enough
bleeds
contrast
into one. Yeah.
Exactly right.
Contrast.
Yep.
So the biggest thing is contrast color.
Yes.
Right. Are probably those, but even one of the data spacing too. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like that alone is I think universal. Right. If it's too close, but probably to some degree more challenging for individuals who have sight problems.
Mm-hmm.
What I do love that they did add though is like the scroll of bar charts or things in video, because it used not to be that way.
Correct. And I think one feature that I'm looking for more enhancements around is, how you have the dynamic axes now? You can actually have a dynamic axis where you zoom out, and then you can see all the data, and you can zoom in to see smaller data, and then you can then drag across to see things. I really like the zoom axes. I think this is a lot of potential for some enhancements that could really make that feature much richer, so we can still get. So that's my challenge, right? If I'm looking at 10 years of data, I want to see every month by 10 years, but I may also want to zoom into the last three years or the last year and look at that information. So I'm looking at trending at a wider time range, but I also may want to look at the same small time range. And yes, we can build bookmarks. Yes, we can hide different charts. Yes, we could build different measures to hide or show different values. But those are all features that you have to build more stuff to get that to work. And so that's where a lot of this stuff that goes in my mind. I'm going, okay, this is really cool. There's a ton of really interesting things that we can be building, but I don't know if it's really worth my time to invest all this effort to build these fancy things. There comes with two problems. I have to maintain it. I have to make sure it works correctly to begin with. So those are just adding additional effort to me to slow me down.
Well, this goes to, I feel, heart of this is huge thing here has to do with the audience and the people we are actually building for. Because with the categories or the grouping or even the graphical objects, if they're very raw, very new to all of this, they're not going to understand. Like, there has to be a lot of extra context there, where maybe you have some reference material on the page, or you keep it as simple as possible. If you know the audience and you've built reports for them, then that's when you can add a little more spacing or have the conversation with them. Can we group this by anything?
Any other? So we're getting close here on time. Maybe we do like one more or two other things here. Do you want to talk about, like, is there anything, any observations around axes or labels, or maybe overlay objects? Maybe one of those would kind of stick out to you.
I think we covered a lot of the label things.
I think I agree with that one.
I do like the call outs around overlay objects, obviously with images on top of a visual, or to just be, I would say the one that would trip me up sometimes is if I wanted to include like a number over as an overlay on top of a visualization, just make sure it works with all the data, right? Where it may fit perfectly when you have a certain filter setting or context going on. But then if you don't test it out, like there have been cases where I'm like, oh my gosh, like this line now all of a sudden appeared, and you can clearly see that this overlaid object is now getting in the way of actually communicating data. So I think he calls that out as far as like, where do you position these things? Let's make sure that you're not over cluttering the page. But if you do need them and you do need to call them out, like make sure that they're in an area where they fit. Right. I think compositionally speaking, overall, like looking at a report page should be done in that composition way when you think you're done. Right. Like, and it's all about how quickly the end user can consume data. And all of these kind of techniques play a part in having the end user not have to realize any of this ultimately. Right. Like they go in and they go, this looks good. Oh, wow. Right? Like, or, oh yes, things are perfectly on track. That's what I need to know.
Yep.
And they're out in 30 seconds. But to previous points as well, right? You're not going to please everybody. Like somebody's going to come in and be like, you know what? You didn't add our company colors, and the responsibility.
There's no company logo.
Company colors are terrible
because our company colors are bright red and bright yellow. You're right. I didn't.
Like those don't need to match.
Those are colors that are like visually going to peel you away from where I want you to focus your time.
Yes, correct. Hence why you've seen Microsoft moving Power BI away from bright yellow to green now. Apparently, that's a new thing. Anyways, yes, I do agree with that one, and I also like the idea of overlay. I think overlay objects are very challenging. Even when you try to highlight which data points are important and which ones are not, it's actually, I feel like there's quite a bit of math and statistics that need to be going on to really, like, you're highlighting the maximum point or the minimum points, which that's not a lot of statistics. That's just kind of like observationally. But there are other things, like there is a chart called the anomaly detection chart, which does a really good job, I think, highlighting, hey, here's the pattern that we see. Here's a little bubble that tells you why this may have happened. And that gives you additional context, which it conveys an overlay and adds a tooltip all inside the same visual, which I think is really cool and very helpful. I don't know if people utilize it yet or find value from it enough that they put it in every report, but that's another one that I think is very interesting here as well. I think that probably pretty much wraps it up. We've pretty much burned through a perfectly good hour here. Any final thoughts? All right. Looks like we're pretty good there.
I love the article. Go check it out. Brent does a fantastic job, and if his article is anything like his book, I'll probably go pick that up as well. So yeah, definitely a great visual infographic or graphical layout of things to include or avoid to make the end user experience a better one.
Will you buy the paperback or will you buy the digital version, Beth?
I have a long backlog of digital versions that I can use. Probably be that one, but I am a book guy, so
okay. I didn't know if you were like, I don't know if you were like.
Does that answer your question? I could go either way.
Yeah.
I agree. I have like a whole collection of like digital books that I have like gotten halfway through. So apparently having a digital book or a regular book doesn't really help me at all. It's still just kind of, you know.
I like the paper book, especially with like I have good charts and
for visuals.
Yeah, for visualization, because as you go through them, there are a couple pages where it's like, oh man, that's gold, and I put a tab in it, right? So then I can go reference it later on. It's so hard to do in Kindle or anything.
Yeah, you're
That's
right.
true.
You do know that there's a Kindle Windows app, so I constantly can reference on another screen the book while I'm on my computer.
What?
No, Tommy,
Yes.
I don't need to know that because I have my old way of doing things and feeling paper.
Yeah, I hate to
taking
bring
down
anything
trees.
new to this conversation. So
Yeah. I mean, I use the internet for everything else.
It's true. It's true. If it's not in my old way, it's in the internet. So we'll go from there. Excellent. Well, thank you all very much for participating. We appreciate the chat. If you were talking through this one, we hope you were finding good conversation amongst yourselves. We were not here to live chat with you throughout this episode, but we thank you very much for your listenership. We appreciate your ears. We know your time is valuable. And if you don't mind, if you like what you're hearing here, please recommend it to somebody else. Let somebody else know that you also distaste the legends and would like to remove them from your reports. And here's why. And you learn these amazing things from Seth and Mike and Tommy, or mediocre things from Seth and Mike and Tommy, who actually learn from real experts who know what they're doing here. So where else can you find the podcast, Tommy?
You can find it anywhere it's available, Apple and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe. If you have a topic, a question, or a thought that you want us to talk about, you can do so at the powerbi.tips/the podcast site. Leave whatever you want us to talk about. And finally, join us live Tuesdays and Thursdays. The community that we have has been great. 7:30 a.m. Central.
Thank you very much. And we'll see you next time.